Welcome. So here we're going to look at how to do a critical chain method on a very simple model in Microsoft Project. So if you notice here, we have 5 tasks with resources allocated. However, our critical resource in this case is Martin, who is overbooked twice here. So that becomes a little bit of a critical problem. Now, the basic thing that we learned in the past that we can do when we have a resource that's over allocated, shown here, is we just use the level resource. And right now our total duration is 17 days, so we could do that. Let's see how it affects our schedule. And remember, depending upon when you start and where the weekends fall, you may get different results depending upon when you build your model. In this case, it adds 4 days, so we go up to 21 days. So that's an option. So we always have that in our back pocket. We say, okay, well there's one option. We know that's going to increase 4 days. So let's clear that. And that resets us. So let's go through the process now of what we were talking about on the critical chain. So in the first thing we're going to do is we're going to half all the tasks and to the 50% mark. And then we're going to add buffers and also put a late start for anything not on the critical path. So which 3 are the critical path in this case? If you guessed tasks C, D, and E, you'd be correct. It's this longest path. The other way you can quickly find it, again, is go to the tracking Gantt chart. And you can see those 3 right there. Or you can go to the network diagram, and again, it'll show you those. Okay, back to the Gantt chart. So, let's go ahead and do that. So the first thing is, let's go ahead and the things that are not on the critical path, let's put to a late start. So task A and B are not in the critical path, so we'll put those as late as possible. And to do that, we start with the first task in that path, task A. Now by default, you want to have these as soon as possible as the constraint type, and it pops up on the general tab. To adjust it to as late as possible, you put the constraint of as late as possible, and it will update the graph. There you go. That still doesn't quite take care of things, right? So let's add feeder buffers and our total buffer. So on this line, we have 3 days and 5 days. So let's half these. So, oops, I want to be conservative here. Let's say we can't quite pull off half. Doesn't like me to do that, apparently. Trying to just do a number. 2 days there. For 5 days, we'll go the other direction. We'll say 2 days here. So instead of 2.5, we'll go 2. 4 days here. It's going to be 2 days now. And this should be a saved iteration of your project. You should save it before you do this versioning. 8 days goes down to 4 days. 5 days goes down to, let's say 3 days. It's good to keep them in whole days. Now, this isn't realistic yet because, again, we haven't added any buffers or anything. So the buffer, the feeder buffer, has to go into the critical path here. So it's on the dependence between the non-critical path and the critical path. So the dependency on the predecessors is from task 3 to task 6, or from task B to task E. So I have to add it where that dependency is. And that's a mistake that people make. And it's a finish to start dependency plus, well, how many days? It should be half of the actual time. So we have 4 days, so half that, so we're going to put a buffer of 2 days. And it automatically types out 2 days for you. We're also going to put a buffer on the entirety of the schedule. So for the endpoint, we'd also have to add a buffer. And the buffer was 2 days, 4 days, 3 days. Add those up. 6, 7, 8, 9 days. So if we want to add a buffer on the end of the entire project for the project buffer, well, we don't have a dependency to put it under. We can't put it here because that's going to be the dependency between task D and task E. So one technique you can use is just make a completion milestone and just put it at 0 days so it shows up on a milestone. Now traditionally they don't say you don't use milestones in Critical Chain, but this is kind of a shortcut way to make the software do what you want it to do. And so what you do then is you say, well, task E, which is line 6, so I have a precedence of line 6, finish to stop, plus whatever our buffer is. Now our critical path was those 3 things. So we said it was 9 days. I'm going to be a little conservative and give the buffer a 5 instead of 4. So voila. So we didn't add another task, we just had a completion milestone. And now you can see the buffer shows up right here for the project buffer. Now that we have that, we still have Martin a little bit overlapped. But our overall project right now is 14 days instead of 17. So now that we have that, let's take a look and see if our leveling, we can still use that leveling or we can manually adjust. Let's see what our level does for us this time, now that we've made those adjustments. So we did a little bit of adjusting, but now we had this total project buffer, which was flexible. We also had this buffer on this line, which was flexible. And notice, we are still within 14 days. Instead of going up from 17 days to 21 days, we actually dropped a little bit down to 14 days with our buffer. So we actually have a better schedule, and we've consolidated and dealt with the issues with our constraint with Martin. So that's kind of how you can do in Project, Microsoft Project, the adjustments that we talk about in Critical Chain. All right, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed the video. See you in class.